Well, hello plant lovers, it is Matthew in Melbourne welcoming you to my channel. Thanks for finding me here in this crowded YouTube world of orchid care videos. Here I try to grow cold, cool, intermediate orchids. Sometimes I go a bit off-piste, but without any help from equipment, grow lights, greenhouses, humidifiers, etc. Really just me and them trying to find our place inside or outside, or we can't play at all. So plant lovers of the world, if that sounds like your no-nonsense environment, give me a subscribe, follow my ramblings every Friday, the day on which I post. It might help you in your orchid journey, and it might not. And our orchid journey today, yes, once again, oops, I've been shopping. Because, plant lovers, 'tis the season for orchid clubs in Victoria, the state that I live in, to have winter shows. So a lot of things are coming into bloom at this time of year. So it's often a good time for people to show and demonstrate and sell plants. So my local group, the Orchid Species Society of Victoria, had its sale a couple of weeks ago, but there's a lot going on at the moment. So what I will do, I'll link below the calendar to everything that's going on in Victoria. I'll also put it in my post section so you can have a look, because the biggest show in Victoria is coming up in August, where most growers come to show their wares. There's amazing exhibitions by all of the orchid clubs in Victoria. So that is the calendar highlight here in Victoria. But wherever you are, there will be an orchid association, group, society, etc. that does similar things. So just have a little Google, Orchid Society near me or Orchid Club near me, and you'll find the details of what's going on in your area. So in my area, yes, it was the Orchid Species Society sale a few weekends ago, and I really wasn't going to go. And then the morning of, I thought, oh, I'll just go. What happened? Yes, I did come away with some things. I mean, it was inevitable, wasn't it, really? Because that sale is managed by the society and many of the members sell their orchids there. So there's always something interesting. And some things are just so interesting, you can't let them go. They need to be in my life. And so there's quite a few things here for us to go through. So we might go through one at a time, and I will show you what I bought at the Orchid Species Society of Victoria's winter sale. And just a footnote, I'm waving these little cocktail sticks of images because none of these are in bloom, and I don't own the copyright to images of the flowers, so I can't drop them in for you. So you will have to Google, or I can hold up these cards to show you what inspired me. All right, well, shall we start with something that's perhaps expected? So nothing too, glamorous at this point, but nonetheless interesting. Now, if you've watched any of my videos, you know I have a lot of Sarcochilus. So Sarcochilus is a wonderful Australian native orchid, very easy to grow here, grows outside, takes our winter conditions, it can get rained on, takes sun, does need regular-ish waterings, because as you see, it doesn't have pseudobulbs, but it is quite a tough orchid. It can take dry periods, but it does like fairly constant moisture. And it likes, oh, I've just noticed there's a flower spike. Oh, we'll get to that in a minute. Goodness me. Anyway, it does like morning sun, but a bit of protection as the sun moves over and the day gets stronger. So particularly from the hot afternoon sun here in Australia. So Sarcochilus, a very easy group of orchids to grow, and I've got a playlist here, which I'll link. Sarcochilus hartmanniae is a species type, which is my gateway orchid, literally the first thing I ever bought. Does very well, very foliferous. So I've got a lot of Sarcochilus hybrids, pretty easy to grow. However, every now and then there's a cross or something that you look at and think, oh, that looks interesting. Now this one is called Sarcochilus Verolica. Let me just show you that name. There we go. That makes any sense. And as you can see on the label, it's a cross between two species, Falcatus and Fitzgeraldii. Now, if you look at that flower, look how open the flowers are. So Sarcochilus can be quite tight, round petals and sepals, but this is quite open. See, there's quite a gap between each part of the flower. And there's very gentle speckling, which I think is really pretty. So Fitzgeraldii tends to have more upright flowers that are more open, and Falcatus has slightly rounder ones and slightly more pendulous. So the combination, I think, just of the form will be interesting. And then we have this really beautiful speckled, basically white with pink speckling, and that beautiful, quite strong yellow lip. Beautiful. So it was really that image that got me in, and hopefully it comes true to form. And what I have just noticed, which I can maybe try and show you, let me just see, there we go. Can you see in there, in that leaf joint? That is a flower spike. So the other thing, look at the size of that plant. The other thing about Sarcochilus, you will get flowers in the first or definitely the second year from a seedling. If you've got a division, it will flower immediately anyway. But Sarcochilus is one of the best types of orchids to buy as a seedling, because you don't have to wait a decade and worry about dying before your orchid will flower. Vis-a-vis this one, which I think is a deflasked seedling, maybe a year old, and it's already got a flower spike, which is thrilling to me because I'm pretty sure it didn't have one when I saw it, but maybe it did. And now let's just consult the Bible of Australian orchids. There you go, Orchids of Australia by W.H. Nichols. This is out of print, but there were so many editions of this book, you will find a second-hand copy online if you so desire. And he was a botanical illustrator as well, so there's great images of these two plants. So first of all, there is Fitzgeraldii, this one here, and you can see how open the flower is and those gentle speckles. Otherwise though, pretty similar to Hartmanii, which just has tighter flowers. Then if we look at the other page, there we go, we have Falcatus, there we go, here, which once again has quite open flowers, really, really beautiful. So it's that combination of the more spaced apart petals and sepals that sets this flower shape apart from other more classic Sarcochilus, which tend to be rounder and tighter, the flower and sepal arrangement anyway. That's those. Pretty standard Sarcochilus care. You'll find more care videos, if you wish, in my playlist, which I've linked to anyway. That was the first cab off the rank, Sarcochilus Verolica. And that was the princely sum of $30, which is quite a bit for a Sarcochilus seedling, but it is an unusual one. Okay, next up, seeing as we were on a bit of an Aussie run, let's look at this little baby. So look at that little charmer. Funny little thing, isn't it? This is a dendrobium, and it's Dendrobium Monophyllum. There we go. Commonly known as the lily of the valley orchid, and I've got an illustration from our W.H. Nichols book which will explain why. An interesting plant. It is an epiphyte, but also a lithophyte. It's one of those plants that can form mats over a rock and in full sun. So the thing about this is that, like many Australian dendrobiums, they do like full sun, but the leaves will look really yellow and blotchy and terrible. So not so great for cultivation. So if you can kind of protect it from the hot afternoon sun, you can give it the best of both worlds. But full sun and it will love life. Obviously too, in those conditions, relatively dry, so it's going to get lots of water, which will run off and then evaporate quite quickly and be quite hot. So interesting, an orchid that can take quite harsh conditions and one that you can go away on holiday and not worry about. And Dendrobium Monophyllum, here is our cocktail stick of the flowers, as you can see. So those very tall racemes with quite beautiful little yellow flowers, which do look a little bit like lily of the valley, I suppose. But let me just tell you what W.H. Nichols says about Dendrobium Monophyllum. He says, the species often grows massed on rocks and trees exposed to full sunlight, the leaves and pseudobulbs being then bleached yellow. And it flowers irregularly, but mainly throughout September and October, which is spring in Australia. But I have read that it can kind of bloom at any point, the bigger the specimen gets. And then just to give you an idea of where that common name comes from, this is the plant here. And you can see it does look like a lily of the valley, and it is quite fragrant as well. But quite a small plant, so not as massive as Dendrobium speciosum or delicatum or even kingianum. It's a much smaller, low-growing plant, and then it has these racemes of beautiful yellow fragrant flowers that look like lily of the valley flowers from a distance. All right, next thing, which I guess is fairly typical for me as well, of which I have legion, and do I need another one? Yes, is a Cymbidium. Now this one, plant lovers, it's a cross between Cymbidium Cani Gem and Cymbidium Canaliculatum tiger. So that's its cross. And it was crossed in 2021, which is not that long ago. And I think now it has a cultivar name. Let me just check. Yes, I think Cani Gem, C-A-N-I-G-E-M, Cymbidium Cani Gem. Now, the reason I bought this is because it is a cross between Canaliculatum, which is the Australian native, or one of the Australian native Cymbidium species from the far north, which is a tropical seasonal monsoon grower. So very, very hot and humid, and then absolutely dry, and then rinse and repeat. Very different climate to mine, but I have got mine to flower. I'll just drop in the picture of the flower here. But this one is then crossed with a more standard Cymbidium. But the image, which I don't have unfortunately, that the grower had of hers in bloom was beautiful. This interesting combination between two very different types of Cymbidium. The other thing I was curious about too, Canaliculatum needs very particular care here in Melbourne so it survives our winter, which is basically to keep it bone dry for about 4 months, which is quite a tough call. So I was curious, given that this one has 50% of its ancestry is from that type, whether or not the grower kept hers completely dry all winter, and she doesn't. She treats this like the more cooler climate Cymbidiums. So interesting. It's a seedling, and I would say maybe in its 3rd year, given that we've got 3 growth points. So possibly next year, it might be mature enough to give us a flower spike, and we can actually see what this cross looks like. But there we go. So Cymbidium Cani Gem, which is a cross between Croweya Gem, and a cross between Canaliculatum tiger. Okay, now let us move into something else which is relatively common, and this is one of my cocktail sticks. Hang on, here we go. Brassocattleya Lindleyana, there you go. And as you can see, it was $25, but look at those flowers, so beautiful. Now I don't have any Brassavolas, and this is a hybrid between Brassavola and Cattleya. But interestingly, I think I did have a Brassavola at one point, but it didn't make it on the compost heap, plant lovers, which is why I can keep buying plants, because a lot go out, a few come in. But I've always loved the idea of it, those flowers and the fragrance of them. So I was fascinated to see this division and grown by someone who was able to tell me, yes, she grows hers cold, which means outside without any heat. And hers gets our cold winter nighttime minimums, but it's under cover, so it's not getting rained on, and thrives for her. So I was thrilled to learn from the grower that this can do very well in my climate. And that is the great thing about joining a club and going to these kind of sales, is because you'll get to talk to the grower and really understand how the plant grows in your conditions. So I perhaps wouldn't have gone near this, but it's a good sized plant, and I know that it should do well in my climate as long as I don't kill it. But there we go. So Brassocattleya Lindleyana, that one cost the princely sum of $25, but this I am very much looking forward to seeing bloom. Okay, maybe now we'll just go to the more esoteric side, although not really, because this is a dendrobium. It's not that esoteric really, is it? But this one is Dendrobium Herkoglossum. So firstly, look at that growth habit. Looks much more like an epidendrum, doesn't it? Very fine canes and quite grassy. And the grower that was selling this grows his in a hanging basket and just allows it to sort of tumble around and form a mass, which would look fantastic. I don't think this is my cocktail stick. No, it's not. So I can't show you the pictures, but it's a very beautiful pink, very dendrobium looking flower with a lovely strong dot right in the middle. But more than that, it was the habit of the plant that I think I really like the look of. So this has quite a wide distribution throughout sort of Southeast Asia, including the Philippines, and can grow to quite high elevations, which is why it can probably do well outside. So once again, the grower I bought this from grows his outside all year under cover with no heating, exactly my conditions, tick, tick, tick. And it will be quite a vigorous plant with lots of flowers. So I am thrilled to see this. And as with a lot of dendrobiums from that neck of the woods, they do like a drier period in winter, a rest period, but not bone dry, but really dialing it down. And particularly in my climate, where it's a little cooler, trying to keep the leaves dry, because they certainly can be prone to rot if they do get wet and cold, but they can take the temperature if you look after them correctly. Anyway, quite a vigorous little division there. Looking forward to seeing what this does. So Dendrobium Herkoglossum, can't wait. And as we love a little etymology, Herkoglossum comes from 2 words, the Greek word herkos, meaning fence, and the Greek word glossa, meaning tongue. Hence it means there's like a division between the flower on the lip. So on the lip, there is quite a distinct ridge down the middle. So it's almost like the lip is divided in 2. There you go, Herkoglossum. Okie doke, we're moving on now. This is something that perhaps is a foolhardy purchase, as it is a warm grow. It's not going to do well outside for me, but I thought, I have indoor plants. It can survive as an indoor plant, hopefully. Let's have a look. This is an African orchid called Neobenthamia Gracilis. There you go. And again, what I loved about this, well, firstly, of course, I was able to ask the grower how they grow it, and indoors in winter, outdoors in summer. So that I can manage. Quite a spidery grass-like plant, but these amazing bunches of gorgeous flowers. Do I have a No, I don't have a cocktail stick for that one. I have come across it before and wondered about it. So there it was. And I just thought, I need to have that in my life. Quite vigorous, but I have seen images of it pot grown, reasonable height with these beautiful balls of flowers, which don't look dissimilar to Hoya flowers in the clusters that they form. So that also drew me to it. So Neobenthamia neo means like, and Benthamia is another genus of orchids, which are all terrestrial. So as generally Neobenthamia would mean like Benthamia. However, all the Benthamia orchids I've seen look nothing like this. So who knows what the namer was thinking in this particular instance. And Gracilis means graceful. So this is an orchid that allegedly looks like Benthamia, but is graceful. Who knows? Anyway, we'll have to see. This one, I'm not sure, plant lovers, if I can give it what it needs, but I will try. It's a Tanzanian native, and it grows in quite hot, exposed, sunny areas. So it is, again, one of those plants that's going to need as much direct sun as I can give it indoors during winter and outdoors during summer, and not dissimilar conditions to our Australian Dendrobium in that it can often be lithophite and in quite sunny, harsh environments. So yes, a full sun, hot, dry, tough growing orchid. So you probably actually grow it like cacti. So I'll just see if I can find a good spot for it here. Anyway, if anyone's growing Neobenthamia Gracilis, do let me know. All right, we are now getting to the more esoteric end of our table. This one is fascinating and quite a good sized plant. Look at that, so juicy. Warczewiczella Discolor. There you go. Fantastic. Now, firstly, of course, that name, Warczewiczella, looks and sounds Polish. And indeed, it is named after a mid-19th century Polish botanist who spent a lot of time in Central America, which is where this orchid's from, and this group was named after him. So it's Central American, but quite high altitude in those sort of cloud forest conditions where you get lots of humidity, bright light, but lots of cloud cover, which really protects the plant from the sun. So those kind of conditions, plants from those conditions do quite well for me here in Melbourne, as long as you keep them cool in summer, cool and humid, and you keep them cool and humid in winter, but obviously not wringing wet and not too wet in the juncture because you can cause rot. But also a plant that has no pseudobulb, so not something that you want to allow to dry out. But I have here this, I think this is the one. This is the flower stick, the cocktail stick of the flower from this. So it produces its flowers around the edge and they're relatively low down, so sort of below the foliage. So as the plant matures, you basically sort of get rings of flowers around the plant, which actually I've got another plant to show you, completely unrelated, nothing to do with this, but this plant is Celia bella. Can you see that? There you go. So this produces its flowers towards the base of the plant in a ring around the plant. Unrelated and completely different, but the flowering sort of style is quite similar. So this one will produce a ring of these beautiful flowers on quite longish stems. So you certainly get to see them. And I've come across this before and heard the name, but I never saw one for sale. And this one looks like a really great division. And I can see in there is some old spent flower spikes. So this is a flowering size division, which the very thought of brings me joy. I think I've said this before too. In Melbourne, it's really quite hard to find flowering size plants or divisions because there are very few physical nurseries anymore. And there are not that many opportunities to buy plants of this size. So again, join a club, join a society, find like-minded orchid growers, and you'll be able to get your hands on divisions or flowering size plants themselves. Always a great way to go. So this one was the princely sum of $25, but a really unusual plant and a really fantastic flower. And it should do well in my climate, outside undercover all year, loving our cooler temperatures. Perhaps grow it like a Masdevallia. Which then cunningly leads us to this beauty here, which is called Cochleanthes Amazing. There you go. Can you see that? Yes. And this is a cross between Cochleanthes flavelliformis and Amazonica. But interestingly, Amazonica is now classed as Warczewiczella, so related to our friend here. And you can kind of see actually, because the form of this plant, no pseudobulbs, very leafy, and the form of this plant, no pseudobulbs, very leafy, very similar. However, The grower of this Warczewiczella Discolor grows theirs outside all year under cover. Made that point very clearly that it can take my conditions, whereas the grower of this one grows it inside with basic heat, so not super tropical heat, but warm nonetheless. Now, I'm erring on the side of caution, obviously, and doing that. So I'm going to keep this indoors in winter and maybe outdoors in summer. It is a plant that wants relatively low light and continual moisture because, as you can see, no pseudobulbs, so it doesn't want to dry out completely. But the flowers of this are stunning. Obviously, as they're related in form to this, but slightly larger, and I think with a purple lip. So I cannot wait to see this one. And looking at the size of that plant, I would say this is a division and very much flowering size. What do you think? I think so too. Anyway, and Cochleanthes is made of two Greek words, cochleus meaning sort of spiral like a shell, anthos meaning flower. So the flower apparently looks like a shell. So there we go. We'll have to see when it blooms. The Cochleanthes are all South American plants, so the north sort of westish part. Quite a wide distribution, quite a few species, but there we are. And relatively differing altitudes too, which means they could take cooler temperatures. So we'll see how I go with this, but certainly this year it's an inside job for winter. And now then, the final plant. Look at that, which looks, yes, it does, very much like a vanda. Now, unfortunately, the top leaf got snapped off in transit, but I do not think that's a terrible event because you can just see there's the nib of the new leaf growing out there. Now, this plant is Cleisocentron Gokusingii. There you go. And a relatively newly named plant, 2008, I think, named after Linus Gokusingii, who is a Malaysian botanist, particularly interested in orchids, but other general tropical plants, but named after him because he discovered it. It grows in Borneo at high altitudes, so in those sort of misty cloud forests, tick for my environment, but this has blue flowers. Now you have to Google it. I don't have the copyright for any image, so Google it and you will see. This is a blue flower, plant lovers. Now, many orchid growers or plant growers of any description will describe something as blue. It's sort of the holy grail of many, many different types of plants. There aren't that many blue orchids. I have Dendrobium Victoria Reginae, for example. I'll drop that picture in here, described as blue. It's purple, but this ain't two ways about it. It is blue. Very sort of tired and washed out blue, but blue nonetheless. And it has clusters of flowers up the stem. So again, the flowers kind of look a bit like a Hoya. The plant looks like a vanda, and the flowers emerge in clusters at the leaf nodes and not on very long stems. So interesting, very, very interesting plant. Never seen it or heard of it before. I think I have seen an image of the flower before, but there it was. So I would say this is just a cutting, and I imagine perhaps like vandas, relatively easy to propagate. And I am wondering if any of these little nodules here demonstrate the fact that this has been flowering. I'm not sure. But the wonderful thing about this is it is a cool grower. So yes, the grower I got it from grows theirs outside undercover, so protected from the rain, but nonetheless getting our cool winter minimums. And it just looks like it's going to be so tropical and heat loving, but no, high altitude grower. So I'm thrilled with this. Cleisocentron Gokusingii. There we go. Now, the minute this blooms, plant lovers, we will be ringing the bells and I'll make a standalone film about that. So there we are, plant lovers. Some very interesting things to add to the collection. Let's see quite how they go. Obviously, the standard things, the Sarcochilus, the Cymbidium, no issue with those. The other things all slightly new for me, so we'll have to see, but very, very interested to see if I can get anything to bloom, particularly this pale blue, tired blue, amazing looking thing from Borneo. Goodness me, very, very fortunate to have that. Well, if you want to know what is going on next week, plant lovers, you'll have to hit subscribe because I post every week on a Friday. Amateur ramblings, as you've seen. Hopefully none of these will end up in the compost bin, but many of my plants do, unfortunately. So amateur ramblings, take them as you will. But if it will be of any use to you, do hit subscribe. And I very much look forward to seeing you next week. I hope everything is blooming and growing and being successful where you are. And I look forward very much to seeing you next week.